The morning air at Miami International Airport shimmered with humid heat as travelers bustled through the terminals, wheeling carry-ons and clutching iced coffees. Flight 447 to Atlanta was boarding at Gate B19. For most of the 152 passengers, it was just another flight, a short 2-hour journey to reconnect with family, return to business, or make a connection. But for one teenager seated quietly in row 14, this flight would become something far greater, something history would never forget. Jessica Martinez sat by the window, her worn leather backpack tucked beneath the seat in front of her, earbuds loosely hanging around her neck. At 16, she looked like any other high school junior. Oversized flannel shirt, dark jeans, quiet demeanor. She was flying alone to visit her grandmother in Atlanta. Her first solo trip since her father's deployment ended tragically 3 years ago. Her mother had hugged her twice at security. "Call me the moment you land," she'd said. Jessica had nodded and smiled, hiding the twinge of nervousness that always came with goodbyes. As the plane pushed back from the gate and began taxiing, Jessica reached into her backpack and pulled out a worn, folded flight manual. Not for a commercial jet, but for a Piper Cherokee, her father's favorite training aircraft. He'd given her the manual when she was 13, scribbling notes in the margins, quizzing her on airspeed and altitude control during weekend flights to small airfields across Florida. While other kids were scrolling through social media, Jessica had been in flight simulators, banking left, adjusting trim, and calculating descent rates. Her dad, Marine Corps Captain Miguel Martinez, had been killed by an IED in Afghanistan just 3 years ago. A roadside bomb had taken his life, but not before giving Jessica a passion for aviation. He always said, "Meja, one day the world might throw something impossible at you. Be the steadiest hand in the cockpit." She never forgot it. The plane lifted into the skies smoothly, climbing through the morning clouds. Jessica leaned her head against the window, watching the Florida coastline shrink below. Row 14 was midway down the cabin, nestled between business travelers, a few college students, and an elderly couple sharing a crossword puzzle. Across the aisle, a young mother bounced her crying baby. Everything was normal, routine. The seatbelt signs dinged off. A flight attendant passed by offering coffee and juice. Jessica declined politely, returning her gaze to the view. She felt at peace up here. No homework, no notifications, no grief. Just sky. Her fingers absent-mindedly traced the edge of the flight manual on her lap, the smell of jet fuel and recycled air strangely comforting. Then, at precisely 28,000 feet, something changed. IT was subtle at first, a faint flicker of the cabin lights, like a power surge. The engine noise softened slightly, barely noticeable. The intercom crackled once, then nothing. Jessica's ears perked up. She looked around. A few other passengers noticed too. The flight attendant in the forward galley tapped her earpiece and frowned, trying to reach the cockpit point. 10 seconds passed, then 20. No announcements, no updates. The plane flew steady, but something was off. Must be a communication issue. The businessman in 14A muttered, closing his laptop, that Jessica's eyes narrowed. Her instincts, shaped by hundreds of hours in simulators, told her something was wrong, more than just a power flicker. The lead flight attendant, Sarah Kim, walked quickly down the aisle toward the cockpit, knocking sharply on the reinforced door. "Captain Rodriguez?" "First Officer Williams," she called. No answer. She knocked harder. "Captain Rodriguez?" Silence. She turned pale-faced and picked up the internal phone. Nothing. Passengers began murmuring. A man stood, only to be asked to sit back down. A child started crying 2 rows ahead. The mood shifted slowly, like water beginning to boil. Jessica sat still, heart thudding. She looked down at the manual on her lap, her fingers tightening around its edges. Up front, the flight attendant turned toward the cabin. "Is there a doctor on board?" she asked aloud, though her voice trembled. Not with medical concern, but with the weight of something she couldn't explain. The plane was still flying. The autopilot held it steady. But something deep in Jessica's bones told her, no one is flying this plane anymore. The silence in the cabin grew heavier with each passing second. The soft hum of the engines continued, but there was something unnatural about the stillness. No announcements, no reassuring voice from the cockpit to explain the technical delay. The calm that once filled the aircraft now felt eerie, like everyone was collectively holding their breath. Flight attendants exchanged glances that said more than words. Sarah Kim picked up the intercom again, pressed several buttons, and tapped the microphone. It didn't respond. The little green light that normally activated remained dark. Then a man near row 8 stood up, tall and anxious. "What's happening up there?" he called out, voice strained. "We're checking now, sir," Sarah answered. Tried to stay composed, but Jessica could see the tightness in her jaw. This wasn't normal. Then came the thud that IT wasn't loud, but enough to make heads turn. Sarah had knocked harder on the cockpit door with urgency. "Captain Rodriguez," she shouted louder this time. "Captain, please respond." She turned to another attendant behind her and whispered something urgent. The second attendant dashed down the aisle toward the rear, likely heading for the emergency access kit. Jessica's stomach tightened. Something was seriously wrong, not just a broken speaker or minor communication glitch. The pilots weren't answering, the intercom system wasn't working, and now the attendants were looking for emergency keys. The businessman in 14A leaned over toward Jessica. "Is this part of the service?" he asked quietly, almost joking, trying to dispel his own nerves. Jessica didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the cockpit door. Her mind raced. Mechanical fault, hijacking, rapid decompression. No, she would have felt that. Then a terrifying thought crept in. What if the pilots are unconscious? That's when she saw Sarah returning from the rear of the plane with a silver emergency access box. It held tools, oxygen equipment, and an override key card for the cockpit. Something used only in the most extreme circumstances. Jessica's heart pounded. Her dad had talked about this scenario once. If both pilots became incapacitated, a passenger with aviation knowledge could potentially help stabilize the aircraft long enough for air traffic control to provide guidance. It was rare, nearly impossible, but not unthinkable. Sarah used the override key and cracked open the cockpit door slowly, her hand covering her nose. She gasped and pushed it fully open, revealing what no one on board could have expected. Both pilots slumped in their seats, motionless. "Get oxygen up here now," she shouted. Passengers started panicking. Someone screamed. Another person stood and reached for the overhead bin, fumbling for anything to help. Jessica stood, her instincts overriding fear. She stepped into the aisle, gripping the seat backs for balance. "Is it the pilots?" she asked Sarah directly. "They're unconscious. We think it's some kind of gas leak, maybe carbon monoxide. The cabin's still pressurized, but the cockpit..." Her voice cracked. "They're not responsive." Jessica didn't hesitate. "I know how to fly," she said, her voice more confident than she felt. The attendant looked her over. Teenager, flannel shirt, backpack. Way too young to be talking like a pilot. "My dad was Marine Corps Aviation. I've flown real planes, small ones, and simulators. I know this isn't the same, but I can read instruments and talk to air traffic control." Sarah hesitated for a moment. The only sound were murmurs and the soft rush of air through the vents. Finally, she nodded. "Come with me." As Jessica followed her toward the cockpit, 152 lives watched in stunned silence. A teenage girl was stepping into the pilot's seat, and the plane was still flying itself. For now. The cockpit smelled faintly metallic, tinged with something chemical that made Jessica instinctively cover her nose. Sarah reached for emergency oxygen masks and helped Jessica slip one over her face. It was cold and awkward, but necessary. Both pilots were breathing, barely, unconscious but alive. Jessica's hands trembled slightly as she stepped between them, scanning the glowing instrument panels. It looked overwhelming, alien even, but not unfamiliar. Her father had shown her jet cockpit layouts once. She remembered his mantra: scan, don't stare, trust your training. Her eyes moved across the displays. Autopilot active, altitude 28,000 feet holding, heading drifting slightly off course, fuel good, engine stable. But no communications, and both pilots were still unconscious. The headset lay crooked on the co-pilot seat. Jessica reached for it and adjusted the microphone near her mouth. Mayday, she said, her voice tight but clear. "This is Flight 447. Both pilots are unconscious." I am a passenger with limited flying experience requesting immediate assistance. She waited. Nothing but the low buzz of instruments and the faint sound of air circulating. Try again, Sarah urged, handing her a laminated radio frequency chart. Jessica scanned it, switching to the emergency frequency her dad had once drilled into her memory. She repeated the call. This time, static crackled to life. Flight 447. This is Atlanta Center. Say again. Jessica exhaled in relief. This is Jessica Martinez, passenger in row 14. Both pilots are unconscious. I'm in the cockpit. I've flown single-engine aircraft. I can follow instructions. Please advise. There was a long pause, as if the controller needed time to process what he'd just heard. Copy that, Jessica. We're alerting emergency response. You're not alone. We're going to help you every step of the way. Jessica nodded to herself, her fingers tightening around the yoke. Just tell me what to do. Back in the cabin, passengers sat in stunned silence. A woman near the front asked, "Did she say a girl is flying us?" A man clutched his armrest. "Can she do it?" The flight attendants moved quickly to calm people down, repeating only what they knew for sure, that someone was in control. But the truth, that a 16-year-old was flying a commercial airliner, was almost too unbelievable to say aloud. Back in the cockpit, Atlanta Center guided Jessica step by step. Maintain heading 095. Confirm autopilot still engaged. Autopilot engaged. Heading 095 confirmed. Jessica responded, her voice gaining strength. You're doing great, Jessica. Can you check if either pilot is responsive? She glanced at Captain Rodriguez. No movement. She touched his shoulder gently. Sir. No reply. The co-pilot moaned faintly but didn't wake. They're still unconscious, Jessica reported. Understood. We're diverting all other aircraft. You'll land at Hartsfield Jackson. Do not descend until instructed. Jessica acknowledged. She sat straighter now, adjusting the seat. She recognized more and more the instruments. Artificial horizon, vertical speed indicator, throttle controls. Her dad's lesson swam back into focus like muscle memory awakening from sleep. Remember, he'd once told her as they flew together in his Cherokee, you don't fight the aircraft. You fly with it. It wants to fly, let it. She took a deep breath. The aircraft was stable. The systems weren't failing. She had help from the ground. She could do this. Outside the cockpit windows, the sky stretched endlessly. Far below, the Georgia countryside rolled quietly beneath her, unaware that the lives of 152 passengers now rest in the hands of a girl who wasn't even old enough to vote, but she was her father's daughter. And in this moment, that meant everything. Jessica adjusted the headset again, her palms damp with sweat. The low hum of engines reminded her that autopilot still held strong, but she knew this was building toward something, the moment when she'd have to take full manual control. Atlanta Center, this is Jessica, she said into the mic, trying to sound calm. I need to know how to take over manually if autopilot fails. The voice responded with professional clarity. Understood, Jessica. We're going to walk you through everything. You're doing remarkably well. Let's begin by confirming your autopilot systems and settings. She studied the panel, glowing green button labeled AP active, altitude locked, heading stable. A line of text blinked. AV hold engaged. I see autopilot. Heading 095. Altitude 28,000 locked. Speed is steady, she reported. Perfect. That's what we want for now. You're flying a Boeing 757 to 200. Most systems are automated, but when we approach final descent, we'll begin transferring control to you manually. Do not rush. Jessica nodded, her chest tight. Below, clouds thinned, and land came into better focus. A few tears pressed at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away. Not now. Later, I in the cabin. Murmurs had changed to prayers, questions, and stunned whispers. One passenger, a retired pilot from Jacksonville, stood up and tried to make his way forward, but a flight attendant gently blocked him. Please sit, sir. I'm not trying to cause panic, he said, voice low. I just want to know if we're really being flown by a teenager. She's not just any teenager. The The flight attendant said firmly, "She's the reason we're still in the air." That answer spread down the aisle faster than turbulence. Some passengers were shocked, others inspired. One woman whispered to her husband, "I've never prayed for someone I didn't know before." Back in the cockpit, Jessica adjusted her seat forward, feeling small but determined to own the moment. Her hands hovered over the yoke. It was heavier than the one she knew, not plastic and light like simulators. This felt real because it was, "Jessica, we're going to prepare you to disengage autopilot when we give the signal. Do not do it yet. First, familiarize yourself with throttle and flap controls. They're on the center console." She located the throttle levers. Black handles curved like horns. Flaps labeled with a white dial beside them. "I see them," she confirmed. "Good. You'll only need to adjust them during final approach. We're clearing your descent path now." Jessica exhaled deeply. "Copy." She looked out the windshield. The horizon stretched wide, clouds drifting beneath like a cotton sea. In the distance, two dark shapes emerged, F-18 Hornets. "We've got visual confirmation." The controller said, "You're being joined by Navy escorts. They'll fly beside you as you descend. It's just backup, you've got this." A lump formed in Jessica's throat. "Roger that." Inside the cabin, people pressed faces to windows, stunned to see military aircraft flying in formation just off the wings. The tension, the disbelief, all felt surreal. A 16-year-old girl was preparing to fly them home, and the United States Navy was backing her up. "Jessica," the voice said to the headset again, "you're going to make history today. We'll begin your descent in the next 10 minutes. When you're ready, we'll walk you through every second." She gripped the yoke lightly. Her voice was steady now. "I'm ready." She didn't know if that was entirely true, but she knew one thing for certain. She would not let her father down. Down in radar rooms and control towers across Georgia, the news spread fast. An untrained civilian, a teenage girl, had taken the pilot seat of a commercial Boeing 757. The FAA issued immediate emergency protocols. Two F-18 fighter jets had locked onto Flight 447's position and flanked it from either side. News outlets scrambled, networks broadcast breaking updates. Teenage passenger attempt to land jet after pilot's collapse. Inside the cockpit, Jessica didn't hear any of it. All she had was a headset, the hum of instruments, and her own steadying breath. "Jessica, we've cleared runway 8 right at Hartsfield-Jackson." The controller said calmly, "Your descent will begin shortly. You're going to disengage autopilot on my count. Keep your hand light on the yoke, firm on throttle. We'll guide you step by step." "Copy," Jessica replied. Behind her, Sarah stood just inside the cockpit door, watching silently. She wasn't just making sure Jessica was okay. She was standing witness to something extraordinary. Jessica reached forward, fingers hovering over the autopilot button. She thought her dad's voice again. "Aircraft want to fly? Just help them land. Disengage autopilot in 3, 2, 1 now." Click. The aircraft gently rocked as Jessica took manual control. For a second, her breath caught. The feeling was different, heavier than anything she'd flown before. But then muscle memory took over. She guided the yoke with care, making micro adjustments to keep the plane level. "You're doing perfect," the controller's voice reassured. "Descend to 22,000 feet. Pull throttle back slightly. Watch your vertical speed." Jessica adjusted as instructed. The altimeter began ticking down, her pulse surging with I in the cabin. The announcement came, "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. Our passenger pilot is beginning our descent with assistance from air traffic control. We ask that you remain calm and follow all instructions." Gasps echoed through the aisle, then came silence. A man in 20C whispered, "She's flying us. A teenager is flying us." Someone murmured, "God help her." Another replied, "God help us all." But strangely, as seconds passed, the cabin didn't erupt into panic. Instead, people began to trust. Maybe it was a calm in the attendant's voice, or the way the aircraft still moved smoothly through clouds in the cockpit. The Air National Guard jets flew in close formation. One pilot radioed the tower, Visual confirmation. Civilian appears in control. Aircraft remains stable. On the ground, the story had already gone viral. Jessica Martinez's name appeared across headlines. Her school photo, the most recent the media could find, flashed on screens worldwide. Who is Jessica Martinez? They asked. A pilot's daughter becomes a nation's hope. But Jessica wasn't thinking about any of that. Approaching 18,000 feet, she reported. Excellent. Begin adjusting flaps to position 5. She turned the dial slowly. The aircraft responded with a subtle shift, slowing slightly. Reduce speed to 240 knots. You're doing amazing, Jessica. She let out a breath. Okay, flaps adjusted, speed coming down. Good. Next checkpoint, 10,000 feet. Jessica wiped sweat from her brow. The oxygen mask itched, the headset pressed tight against her skull, and every muscle in her arms screamed from tension. But she never let go of the yoke. You were made for this, she told herself. Dad made sure of it. Back in the cabin, the little boy in row 12 turned to his mother. She's brave, he whispered. She's a miracle, the mother replied, her voice cracking 12,000 feet. The clouds broke, and there it was, the sprawling city of Atlanta, glinting like scattered diamonds. The runway stretched ahead like a narrow promise. Jessica, the controller said, you're going to land this plane. We'll bring you home. And Jessica, jaw tight, hand steady, simply answered, let's finish this. The city unfolded beneath her like a living map. Grids of highways, tiny cars, the silver ribbon of the Chattahoochee River winding through the suburbs. Jessica's knuckles were white on the yoke, her breathing steady, but each exhale sounded like thunder in her headset. Jessica, you're clear for final approach, said the calm voice from Atlanta Center. Reduce speed to 180 knots. Begin gradual descent to 3,000 feet. Roger that, Jessica replied, voice calm but her chest tight. She adjusted the throttle, easing it back. The engines responded with subtle whine, and the aircraft's nose began to lower. Out of the corner of her eye, the two F-18 still flanked her like guardian angels in gray armor. Begin extending flaps to position 15, the controller instructed. Jessica reached down and turned the flap dial with precision. Her hands moved with purpose now, not flawlessly, but with care and memory in her mind. Her father's voice played like a ghost in the cockpit. On approach, feel the air. You're not just flying, you're listening. Her eyes flicked across the panel. Altitude steady, speed dropping, no alerts. She was in control. Inside the cabin, passengers braced in silence. The nose of the plane had dipped slightly, the city now visible beyond the windows. A wave of gas rippled to the rows as Atlanta's skyline emerged, the gleaming towers of downtown, the sprawl of suburbs, the long black lines of Hartsfield-Jackson's runways in the distance. She's bringing us in, someone whispered. She's really doing it. A businessman in row 6 began to cry openly, hands clenched around the armrests. A teenager was about to land a 180,000-pound jet with 152 people aboard, and there was nothing anyone could do but believe. Gear down, the controller said. Jessica moved her hand to the gear lever, pulling it down slowly. She felt the aircraft vibrate slightly as the landing gear deployed. A row of green lights on the panel lit up. Gear down and locked, she confirmed. Flaps to 25. Adjust pitch slightly upward. You're doing perfect. I've got visual on the runway, Jessica said, eyes narrowing toward a long gray strip cutting across the Georgia landscape below. The jet was descending smoothly. Ahead, Hartsfield-Jackson looked like a nervous audience holding its breath. Emergency vehicles lined the tarmac, red trucks, yellow lights flashing, foam rigs ready, all waiting for a teenager to defy the odds. Speed 160 knots. Slight left correction, heading 135. She adjusted course, the nose swaying slightly as the runway centered in her view. The plane responded, heavy but willing. Altitude 1,200 feet. Looking good, Jessica. She blinked away sweat, every muscle locked in focus. Her fingers gripped the yoke, her feet firm on the rudder pedals. She wasn't just flying the plane, she was a plane. Every breath matched the hum of the engines. Jessica, The voice in her ear said quieter now, "There are 152 people counting on you, but don't think about them. Just land this like you've done 100 times with your dad." She exhaled. Copy. At 800 feet, Jessica began her final alignment. The ground rushed up fast than it ever had in Cherokee. Buildings blurred past, and the runway widened like open arms. Throttle back slightly. Keep nose level. You're on glide slope. She eased the throttle down. The plane responded with slow, sinking grace. Flare at 50 feet. The moment was near. Her eyes didn't blink. Her hands didn't shake to eye in the cabin. Silence turned to prayer. People bowed their heads, held hands, gripped seats. And through it all, they felt it. Not just fear, but awe. Jessica Martinez, 16 years old, had brought them this far. Now she only had to land. The runway stretched wide ahead of her, shimmering in the afternoon Georgia sun. Jessica's pulse thundered in her ears. Every breath was calculated, every muscle locked in place. Below 100 feet, throttle to idle, came the voice from the tower. Idle confirmed. Jessica answered and gently pulled the throttle back. The aircraft slowed, and she began to feel the weight shifting. The nose dipped. The runway widened like a final invitation. Prepare to flare at 50 feet. Jessica counted. 60? 50? She gently pulled the yoke back, not too hard, just enough to lift the nose slightly. Her fingers trembled, but her motion was steady, graceful. The main wheels touched down first with a hard thud, not smooth but stable. The aircraft jolted, and for a split second, the plane bounced, threatening to tilt. Jessica held on. Then the nose came down, connecting with the runway with a jolt that sent a gas through the cabin. The tires screeched. The aircraft skidded slightly right, but she corrected quickly with the rudder pedals, steadying the jet as it barreled down the strip. "Brakes, Jessica. Easy on the pedals," the tower advised. She applied pressure, gently, steadily. The engines roared in reverse thrust, slowing the aircraft. The runway rushed past in a blur, emergency vehicles to the left, foam crews standing ready. The plane slowed. The shaking stopped, and then silence, rolling wheels, a full stop. The aircraft came to a complete halt at the end of runway 8 right. For one suspended second, nothing happened. No one spoke. No one breathed. Then, from the rear of the cabin, a voice shouted, "She did it!" The cabin exploded into cheers, applause, tears. A woman sobbed openly. A father hugged his daughter. A man dropped to his knees and clasped his hands skyward. The flight attendants ran to the cockpit. Sarah opened the door just as Jessica slumped back into the seat, her hands falling away from the yoke, her eyes glassy with shock and adrenaline. "Jessica," Sarah said, kneeling beside her. "Jessica, you're okay. You did it." "I landed," Jessica whispered. "I actually landed it." She didn't cry, not yet. She couldn't. Her body still buzzed with the sound of engines and wind and voices in her head. She felt like she was still flying. Emergency crews boarded quickly. Paramedics rushed to the cockpit, lifting the unconscious pilots from their seats. Oxygen was administered immediately. One of them stirred. "Heart rate strong," a medic said. "They're coming around." But everyone's eyes, even professionals, kept drifting back to the girl in the pilot seat. 16. Alone, and now a hero. Outside the aircraft, reporters had already begun gathering behind barriers. The footage from the tarmac, a commercial jet stopped mid-runway, escorted by fighter jets, emergency lights flashing, had already made international headlines. Helicopter crews zoomed in on the scene. A close-up of the cockpit showed a single figure sitting inside, small, calm, staring forward, Jessica Martinez. The name had already started trending. Hashtag pilot in row 14, hashtag Jessica landed, hashtag hero flight 447 back inside. As passengers disembarked, many stopped beside the cockpit to look and not see damage, but to see her. Some said nothing. Others placed trembling hands over their hearts. An older woman whispered, "Thank you for bringing me home." Jessica just nodded. She still didn't fully believe it herself. After the final passenger left, the jet sat still in the middle of Hartsfield-Jackson's busiest runway, surrounded by flashing lights and crews. In the cockpit, Jessica finally unbuckled her harness and stood. Outside, cameras waited. But before stepping off the plane, she reached into her flannel shirt pocket, pulled out a photo of her father, worn, creased, and tucked it behind the instrument panel. "You were right, Dad," she said softly. "The world did throw something impossible at me." Then she opened the door and stepped out into history. The sun was setting by the time Jessica Martinez finally left the runway, wrapped in a silver thermal blanket, flanked by emergency responders. She descended the air stairs of a crowd that had gathered behind barriers. Reporters, ground crew, police, and camera operators from every major network. She blinked at the flashbulbs, overwhelmed by the noise, the attention, the surreal magnitude of what happened. But she kept walking. She didn't wave. She didn't speak. She was still in that cockpit, still clutching the yoke in her mind. Paramedics offered her water. One of the military escorts, a young Navy lieutenant, approached her and saluted. "Miss Martinez," he said with reverence, "my squadron watched that entire landing. What you did today was extraordinary." Jessica barely nodded. "It was a lot," she said quietly. "You brought them home," he replied. "You're a pilot now, whether you have a license or not." Hours later, she was taken to a press room inside the airport, where dozens of microphones waited. Her mother had been flown in on an emergency flight and rushed to her side. When she saw Jessica, she broke down in tears and held her like she never wanted to let go. "I thought I lost you," her mom sobbed. "I thought I was going to lose me too," Jessica whispered. Then at 11:30 p.m., she stood in front of the world. News outlets from every country tuned in. Her name trended globally. The FAA director made a public statement. "We are launching a full investigation into the cause of pilot incapacitation, but make no mistake, Jessica Martinez's actions today saved 152 lives." She stepped up when no one else could. She stepped up to the microphone, still in her flannel shirt, eyes red but clear. "I didn't think I could do it," she admitted, "but I heard my dad's voice the whole time. He trained me for this, not for a real jet, but for the idea that you don't run from fear. You fly through it." One reporter asked, "What will you do next?" Jessica looked up. "Get my pilot's license," she said. For real this time. In the following days, the world couldn't get enough of her story. She appeared on every talk show. A book deal was offered. A film studio made inquiries. Within a week, the FAA awarded her a Certificate of Civilian Bravery, the youngest person in U.S. history to receive it. But Jessica stayed grounded. She returned to school, finished her exams. She even went back to flying tiny Cherokees this time. Under official instruction, her first solo flight, her instructor left a note taped to the dashboard. "No one doubts you can fly, Jessica. Now prove it to yourself." She smiled and took off with the confidence of someone who'd already landed a jet that a year later, on a bright spring morning. She stood at the gates of the United States Naval Academy, a full scholarship awarded for her actions that day on Flight 447. She wore a crisp white uniform, her hair tied back, and a silver pin on her chest. Her father's old Marine Corps wings, as she walked onto the campus the first time, a group of midshipmen saluted her in silence. Not for her rank, but for her courage. Jessica looked up at the sky, vast, clear, full of promise. "I'm ready," she whispered. She had once flown through fear. Now she would fly toward her future.